Hi there everybody, by birth my name is Alex William Smith, but I'm better known now as international comedy stage hypnotist and celebrity hypnotherapist Jonathan Royle. You can see my career resume, which will become relevant in a minute, at www.magicalguru.co.uk. That's magicalguru.co.uk. Now, in short, the short version, but you need to watch the full video to get the context, so don't take things out of context, but the short version is that stage hypnosis shows can be both physically damaging and dangerous and psychologically damaging and dangerous in many potential ways. And frankly, most so-called comedy stage hypnotists, or even worse, magicians and mentalists, just combining a bit of suggestion work, not even full formal hypnosis, do not seem to be aware of the potential dangers. Even worse, they do not seem to be aware of the laws that govern them. Now, in England, we have the 1952 Hypnotism Act, which was amended by the 1989 government guidelines, the 1995 Home Office report into the safety or not of stage hypnosis, the 1996 government review and extra model conditions, and also the effects of the Licensing Act 2003. In Israel, for example, stage hypnosis shows are effectively illegal. If you call them a stage hypnosis show and you present it in a manner recognisable as such, then that's breaking the law. In Sweden, they are technically illegal. You have to have certain permissions in place or present them in a certain manner, calling it something different and doing things in a very certain specific manner, which is the same thing in England. You know, you have to get a licence to perform each and every single show from the local licensing authority of the council for the area where you're going to be performing that show. Sometimes a fee is payable, other times it is not. But in any event, attached to that will be model conditions, which generally says that you've got to abide by everything laid out in the 1952 Hypnotism Act and other conditions as well. But it is an automatic given that any permission given to perform in England will also mean that you abide by any and all other laws of the land. In other words, health and safety law, duty of care laws, etc., etc. And indeed, in most places in the world, the majority, not all, but in most places in the world, it's a matter of international law and the local laws of that place that you would be expected to abide by all health and safety and or duty of care laws, whether or not there is any local specific regulations or laws in relation to hypnotic style entertainment or not. And because of this, very sadly, it's the case that many so-called stage hypnotists will be invalidating their public liability and professional indemnity insurance. Even scarier is that many of them only have public liability insurance and they're conning the councils because they do not have professional indemnity, which is the bit that covers them for any potential claims of psychological or physical harm caused by hypnosis itself. And the policy must state that it covers people whilst they are in the hypnotic trance, so-called trance state, which is unidentifiable, so it's a bit of a farce. But if you cannot prove that you've got that said cover, then you would be in a real sticky situation. God forbid should anyone ever make a false claim, or even worse, a genuine claim against you for physical or psychological harm after participating in one of your shows. And don't think, oh, it could never happen to you. Just because there's not been a lot of media coverage recently in England, America or other places in the world about stage hypnotists getting sued for such things, the fact is it's still been going on. It's just that these days the insurance companies generally take the view that they settle out of court even if it can be shown that the hypnotist is not guilty, because it turns out to be cheaper for them than fighting with the legal fees and such. That quite often happens. However, now and again, they do make the media. Knowledge gets to the press and it's bad publicity for absolutely everyone. I'm really glad to say, touch wood, that as I make this video on the 5th of December 2023, I've never had any claims against me whatsoever for physical or psychological harm caused allegedly during a comedy stage hypnosis show. And more importantly, I've never had anyone have any physical accident or suffer any harm during one of my shows, which is something that a lot of the so-called massive big names in British hypnosis can't say. They've had people, many of the big theatre hypnotists of the past have had people fall off stage, break their legs on multiple occasions, or twist their ankles, or blow their thumb off with a blank gun. There's various documented by the media cases of people being caused physical harm and alleging psychological harm and humiliation at the hands of comedy stage hypnotists, not just in England, but also in various other places in the world. Indeed, the truth of the matter is, in that 1950-51 thereabouts, a British hypnotist, Peter Casson, had to fight to save stage hypnosis shows in England after an American hypnotist, Ralph Slater, had come to England, done a show, not awoken the people properly, not ensured they felt better afterwards, and one individual felt depressed. I've seen talk of her feeling suicidal afterwards. Ultimately, it caused a massive mayhem, negative media publicity galore for the hypnosis industry. And if it wasn't for Peter Casson, who later set up the Federation of Ethical Stage Hypnotists, FESH, in England, campaigning and lobbying the British Parliament that rather than banning comedy stage hypnosis shows completely, rather than banning entertainment hypnosis in its entirety, which is what people were campaigning for at that time, and it was very close to happening, that instead there should be brought in stringent laws and guidelines. And that is what became known as the 1952 Hypnotism Act. In 1989, model conditions were added to tighten up some of the loopholes and also to bring it more up to date, so that, for example, rather than it saying as it once did that you had to only hypnotise people who were aged 21 or over, which was the age of when you were deemed to be an adult at the time in England, it had now then changed to that anyone over the age of 18 could be hypnotised, because that's when they were deemed to be an adult in British law. But nonetheless, in 1993, a lady called Sharon Taban died a number of hours after a comedy stage hypnosis show took place in England that was presented by a by-day postman, by-night hypnotist Andrew Vincent. But the coroner's report concluded there was no connection to the comedy hypnosis show whatsoever. And in fact, at the links you can find above or below this video, you will find videos from 1994, where I'm on British television shows galore in the January, the February and onwards, fighting against the campaign against stage hypnotists. Sharon Taban, the lady who died after inhaling her own vomit, her mother, Margaret Harper, founded the campaign against stage hypnotists and was lobbying Parliament to try and get stage hypnosis banned completely, saying it caused her daughter's death, which it was ruled that it most certainly didn't. Now, just for the record, I do believe there are circumstances where incompetent stage hypnotists could contribute to a person's death if that individual is a clinically depressed individual, a psychologically imbalanced individual, an adult with learning difficulties that ends up feeling humiliated by the whole experience, or is, you know, there's various situations where the experience of taking part in a comedy stage hypnosis show could cause extreme psychological pressure and stress to an individual and could have a knock-on rebound effect, so that ultimately it could be argued that it had contributed to their exacerbated, increased negative mental state, possibly even contributing to their death. Which is why I clearly state that in an ideal world, the 1952 Hypnotism Act wouldn't, as many comedy stage hypnotists would say and would like, be abolished. No, if anything, it would be made more stringent, and it would be made a law that applied worldwide, everywhere in the world. And yes, for you American comedy stage hypnotists, that would mean no more school shows, no more hypnotising kids under the age of 16, or ideally no more hypnotising people under the age of 18. It doesn't take talent to get kids to do things anyway, as I say later in this video, because at the end of this I'll put the 3 little videos that I put in a Hypnosis Facebook group on the 3rd of, on the 4th of December, yesterday. I'll put them at the end. So yeah, I would say for a comedy stage hypnotism show, only people aged 18 or above should be allowed to participate. More importantly, if those people have clearly got any form of learning disability or psychological impairment, they should not take part, which is part of the reason why the 1989 guidelines and 1996 Home Office report clearly state that during your pre-talk, you must say that nobody should volunteer during this evening show who is asthmatic, epileptic, clinically depressed, or pregnant, or suffering from any physical or emotional illness or disease that they feel could be affected in any manner by taking part in and being potentially one of the stars of this evening's show. So it really needs to be stressed that that is part of the law. Also in British law, it has to clearly state on posters that volunteers who must be aged 18 or over can leave the stage at any time during the show. So it's clear that they're free to leave, because otherwise people could feel psychologically under pressure to remain longer than they should. And that itself could trigger feelings of shame and guilt and regret and stuff that could exacerbate or actually be the root cause of negative self-identity, psychological issues. These things can all be easily avoided by not hypnotising anyone under the age of 18, making it quite clear that nobody under the age of 18 should volunteer, sending anyone back who looks like they might be under the age of 18, unless they've got quite clearly genuine ID to prove that they are 18 or above, sending anyone back who appears to be under the influence of alcohol or drugs of any nature, whether recreational or prescription. If there seems to be any, severe slur in speech or stuff, easier just say that it's for safety purposes, it's best that I send you back to the audience. There are a whole bunch of things to consider, way too many to go in here. That's why it takes hours to go into them all on the transparency template video training set, the revolutionary guide to health and safety, duty of care laws, and your legal, moral and ethical obligations as a hypnotist to ensure that your volunteers are all safe, psychologically, physically, emotionally and spiritually on all levels at all times during your show. It's not just about making sure that the chairs are sturdy. It's not just about making sure there's no bits on any props you give them that could cut them by accident. It's about ensuring that all suggestions given to them during the show are completely cancelled out in every way, shape and form, so that they cannot affect them after the show. Something I talk about at the other videos you can see at the link that's above this video or below this video. It's about ensuring you abide by all elements of the 1952 Hypnotism Act, albeit that, yes, you can use some loopholes that are explained on the transparency template in order that you can perform anytime, any place, anywhere, as long as it doesn't break health and safety and duty of care laws, of course, or any other laws of the land. But generally speaking, as long as it's a safe environment, you can perform anytime, any place, anywhere when you operate within the boundaries of the 1952 Hypnotism Act, which means things such as presenting shows for scientific and research purposes only, collecting data for your forthcoming books if you can prove you do that, which I can, because I've got over 50 books out on sale on Amazon. You don't need 50 out, but you need to be able to prove that you are part of ongoing research to be able to both ethically, morally, legally and lawfully use a loophole like that. There are other loopholes mentioned on the transparency template, but we go into the depth about, yes, you can use them so that you don't have to bother applying for a licence to perform, or if it's a local authority or that says that they ban hypnosis shows, some of them still try that, or it's a place in the world that says you can't do hypnosis shows, then you can do like Kreskin does. Well, there's no such thing as hypnosis, and, present it in a different manner, you can do that, but you need to be fully confident and competent in knowing exactly what hypnosis truly is and what it isn't. Incidentally, it's not as simple as just saying hypnosis doesn't exist, because the 1952 Hypnotism Act, which is the benchmark for things, defines that hypnosis includes all forms of suggestion and techniques intended to increase the suggestibility of the volunteers, which of course therefore makes things somewhat more complicated, but all of that is covered in the transparency template. The key of what I'm saying is that the laws are there for a reason. They're good ones. If anything, they need tightening up and other restrictions need putting in place. Every single comedy stage hypnotist on the planet should have a valid Criminal Records Bureau TREC, or as they're called in England at the minute, a DBS, criminal disclosure thing that proves that you have not got any convictions for anything relevant, okay? So you've not got any convictions for physical violence, emotional abuse, or anything that could potentially be deemed to be relevant to your potential safety and competence or not as a stage hypnotist. That should be something. And definitely nobody under the age of 18, because that's what the law is in England. It is in, by default, if you apply health and safety and duty of care laws, it could be argued that that applies some other places in the world. We're going to that in the transparency template in more depth. The key being that as psychiatrists, psychologists and real medical type people will tell you, the executive function of the brain, some may refer to it as the analytical or critical area, does not come into play in most people until around 13 or 14 years of age. For some it is later than that. So in order to be safe, you need to leave it till they're at least 16, and in some cases maybe as late as 18. The truth is, in some people, maybe even later. But you can never rule out all risk. That's why we use risk assessments. It's to mitigate risk, to bring it to the safest possible level that's within our control. So if you still want to be able to do shows, you've got to make them as safe as possible. And the way to mitigate that risk is to only ask for and only use volunteers who are aged 18 or above and are deemed as adults, therefore, in England. If you have to be 21 to be deemed an adult in the country you're in, then you should really only ask for volunteers who are 21 and above, because that then covers you in terms of the whole argument of whether they were considered an adult in other areas of law that could get argued if it ever got into a negligence case, and if ever they were looking at the fact of whether or not you abided by your obligations under health and safety related laws and duty of care laws, under which you have an obligation to make things as safe as possible. And if it can be shown or argued that you should have reasonably been expected to know that, for example, the executive function critical faculty may not be fully formed in an individual till anywhere between the ages of 14 to 18 in severe circumstance, and that the easiest way to avoid this potentially being an issue is just to not ask for volunteers who are under the age of 18, and to make sure you don't use anyone who looks under 18 unless they can prove their age and seem of sound mind. Because people with a non-fully developed executive function cannot critically analyse things as well as perhaps would be arguably ideal, and also are more likely therefore to suffer a negative impact on their self-image, self-esteem, self-confidence, and sense of self, their self-identity and what like, through taking part in a hypnosis show and finding themselves suddenly feeling obliged to do something that they hadn't anticipated they would be asked to do, and hearing the audience laughing at them, it can make them feel a sense of shame or guilt or regret or worthlessness, which they have to just brave along at the time and carry on. Or maybe it's not at the time it fully impacts them psychologically, but after the event it can do, and it can just grow, and it can be the root, the seed that grows into them developing psychological illness or mental health problems, especially if there are underlying things lying there that you couldn't possibly have known. you could have exacerbated them or enhanced them negatively. Best to avoid that, because that way you can avoid any potential genuine or non-genuine claims against you for any form of psychological harm. And boy, make sure you've actually got professional indemnity cover that covers for people while they're hypnotised, as well as public liability. I can tell you a scaring number of UK hypnotists at least do not have insurance cover that states that. Just having normal equity insurance cover isn't enough. You need the stage hypnotist specific policy so that it clearly states it covers people while they're hypnotised. So don't hypnotise people who are under 18. You can use them in your show, but don't hypnotise them. Get them up, have them take part in comedy routines, interacting with the hypnotised individuals. Yeah, by all means, your normal public liability insurance cover will cover that, because there's no professional indemnity as a hypnotist won't come into it, because you're not going to hypnotise them. That's fine. However, seriously, in short, I could talk forever and a day, but the point is, don't get volunteers up who are under the age of 18. If anyone looks under 18, send them back. If they look like they're over 18, but they clearly have mental health issues or seem to have learning disabilities or whatever, say for their own safety, it's best if they go back. Better to do a show with very few people and being as safe as you possibly can be at all times. Further, make sure you've got a proper risk assessment in place for your show. Not just for your show in general, but you need one, certainly under British health and safety and duty of care laws. For each venue, when you arrive, you need to put one together so it's venue specific. So you've got those records, so that if anyone ever does make a claim, you can prove that you've done a venue specific risk assessment in addition to your full show risk assessment, so that you cannot possibly stand the chance, or are less likely to stand the chance, of the insurance company deeming your insurance invalid, because it is a legal obligation to abide by all relevant laws for your insurance to remain valid. And relevant laws include health and safety and duty of care, even in countries where there are no specific hypnosis-related laws. Health and safety and duty of care still applies. There's a few more videos after this, but then there's a link to a page. On there are some videos from early '94, which shows how I helped to save stage hypnosis in England so that it wouldn't get banned. Had it been banned at that time, I can pretty much tell you, given a certain amount of time, it would have probably spread, and around the world, definitely to America as well. America often form their laws down the line based on what England's done previously. Look, be safe. Check out links above or below this. If you've not studied the transparency template, the revolutionary guide for stage hypnotists, then frankly, you are incompetent, because I can guarantee you there's stuff in there that you will not have thought about in terms of safety. So you owe it to yourself, but you owe it to your volunteers, more importantly, to learn what the transparency template teaches you. Check out the links above or below this video. Bye for now. For the record, I'd also feel I should mention, in the sake of completeness and full disclosure, that I am not the only British stage hypnotist who has the view that the 1952 Hypnotism Act is not fit for purpose, in the sense that it should be brought up to date and tightened for the safety of the volunteers and to police the competency or suitability of the stage hypnotists themselves further. Indeed, Mr. Andrew Newton, whose web link you'll also find above or below this video, because he has an ebook available called Inside Stage Hypnosis for £19.99. And whilst that ebook makes mention of me in a derogatory and often untrue and highly inaccurate defamatory fashion, something that will be dealt with in due course through the correct channels. But in any event, the majority of the book is factually correct and true, and it is full of common sense advice, in particular in relation to those situations where you end up with a show where you either lose a lot of volunteers for whatever reason. It can be outside your control, it can be noise, environmental issues or whatever. Or it can have been, there's been a negative news story recently, so people are less likely to volunteer. The reasoning is not so much material, the point is that if you end up with very few volunteers, there is more psychological pressure put on them to perform and more focus put on them, and that can cause a psychological strain. And the longer they're under that strain, the more likely it is it could have a negative impact on their self-identity, their sense of self, or their mental health moving forward from that day. So Andrew very cleverly points out it's recommended guidelines for the length of time certain numbers of people on stage should be allowed to actually perform. And whilst I do not fully 100% agree with the time factors that he's outlined, in principle, I agree, and certainly agree with the underlying reasoning and logic behind why ensuring that people are not pushed into the limelight or the stress and anxiety, as it can be, might seem all positive at the time, but underneath it could have got to a point that's stressful. You've got to be very careful how you structure the wording of suggestions, how you structure the routines, how you ensure they're aware at all times that the audience, we say, are laughing with them but not at them. But as much as you say that, some people can end up taking it as people are laughing at them. And let's be honest, sometimes they are. So you've got to make sure you care for their psychological well-being. So yeah, the transparency template, which is something that was released years before Mr. Newton released his book Inside Stage Hypnosis, is your first protocol, but I would also recommend every stage hypnotist on the planet gets a copy of Inside Stage Hypnosis by Andrew Newton from the link or above or below this video as well. Oh, one final niggle, because this thread's supposed to be about things that niggle you. Well, and that is, and this applies mostly to America, but some other countries, is if you are doing comedy stage hypnosis shows where the majority of your volunteers are under the age of 16, then frankly, you've got very little in the way of talent or self-respect or care, because the fact is, whilst it may be legal for you in America to do high school shows, you're nothing but a glorified babysitter, really, and it's the easiest thing on the planet to get kids to do stuff. You don't need to be a hypnotist. Bloody hell, I was a kids entertainer for years, and hypnosis not required to get them to do any ridiculous stuff. You just tell them to do it. Really, really, there is a reason why the 1952 Hypnotism Act in England prohibits, at one time it was people under the age of 21 when it came into force in 1952, but that got amended with the 1989 government guidelines to being that people under the age of 18 could not be hypnotised on stage for entertainment purposes. And frankly, I agree with that. Maybe lower it to 16 for college age, but no lower than that. And there's a good psychological reason as well. Go and speak to proper psychologists, real psychiatrists, people who actually know a lot more than the vast majority of you stage hypnotists do. These are people I teach, by the way, doctors, medical nurses, tons of them. You can see the testimonials on htglive.com. And the fact is, ask them about the executive function and the critical faculty analytical area, the constructs, but the executive function doesn't kick in until around teenage years or post-puberty. After that, for some people it can be later. In any event, there is strong research evidence and such out there that shows that people are more emotionally vulnerable basically up until the age of 16. And then things are semi-cast in stone. We know that if you know about neuroplasticity, you know that that isn't a hard and fast statement, but in this context it's relevant because whilst the kids might seem happy to take part and get their 5 minutes of fame and be the centre of attention, if one little thing, the audience laughing at them wrong, makes them feel a sense of self-shame, blame, guilt or regret or embarrassment, they may not show it on the day. It could get lodged, it could get repressed, and it can cause long-term psychological issues. There are very real dangers, especially dealing with vulnerable adults who are like children and dealing with, frankly, children. And if I had anything to do with it, high school shows and hypnotising anyone under the age of 16 for entertainment or humiliation, because it is, we call it what you want, but purposes, is or should be banned everywhere. It's illegal in England to hypnotise people under the age of 18 for entertainment purposes, and frankly, it should be worldwide. If you disagree with that, that's probably because you earn most of your money from high schools or state fairs where you're hypnotising kids because you don't have the talent to go, or the to just deal with adults, or the marketing ability just to work in those arenas. Sorry if that offends you, but it's true. And that is, in the context of this thread, what irks you. What irks me is the laws that apply in England, the 1952 Hypnotism Act, if anything, is not strict enough. It should be made tighter, and it should be not just apply in England, it frankly should apply worldwide for the protection of the general public. Okay, so what really niggles me is that the vast majority of comedy stage hypnotists, and by that I mean the ones that are not trained with me, seem to know little, if anything, about health and safety, duty of care laws and their legal obligations. Now, lots of people in America have done the safe on stage thing that Justin James put together, but that's just a Mickey Mouse thing to get cheaper insurance. The fact is, in terms of actually teaching health and safety and duty of care and its relevance to comedy stage hypnosis shows and entertainment, it's not really fit for purpose. There's only one thing on the planet that is, and that's my transparency template. It sounds like a plug, but it isn't, because the main expert on there isn't me. I brought in a health and safety experienced expert of live events, large-scale events and dangerous events. And we also brought in lawyers, and we looked at all the laws around the world, because different countries have different laws relating to hypnosis. Some countries don't have hypnosis-related laws, some do. But what pretty much all civilised countries have is health and safety and duty of care laws that do apply to you as an entertainer or hypnotist, and yet most comedy stage hypnotists don't seem to know about them, or they only know a teeny bit, and they're actually putting members of the general public in danger. But more importantly, you know what? You're probably invalidating your public liability insurance and your professional indemnity insurance, because if anyone was ever to make a claim, they'd look into whether you'd been negligent or not. And quite often, if they can show that you don't have a proper written risk assessment, not just for the act, but also venue specific for each venue on each occasion, that in itself can be an argument for them to consider your insurance cover invalid. There's loads of other things, but the fact is, if you've done one thing wrong, then your insurance would be invalid. And I know for a fact tons of people have fallen into that trap, not just in America and England and Europe, but all over the place, because I've been an expert witness, both for hypnotists, to stop them getting sued, and also in the past I have to say, yeah, the other way around as well, giving evidence that the hypnotists have been negligent. The only way to truly avoid that is to properly study health and safety and duty of care, and there is nothing more comprehensive than transparency template, which sounds like an advert, yes, but it's true, and it ties into the context of the fact nothing niggles me more than the fact that most stage hypnotists don't have a clue when it comes to those subject matters. And one thing's for certain, 99% of the courses out there don't teach it, and if they do, they just scrape over it. Nothing comes close. So yeah, you can have a rant now if you want and say that this is some kind of marketing promotion. It isn't. I don't care if you buy it or not. You know, I'm sure you can find a dodgy site out there where you can download it for free, if your ethics allow you to. At least by studying it, whether you'll admit it or not, you'll learn tons and you'll become a far safer comedy stage hypnotist. Okay, it's 11:15 here in United Kingdom, England, in the evening that is, and hence I have pyjamas on because it's chill time. In any event, when a thread is making an assertion, namely as this thread does, that the original poster said that, you know, most stage hypnosis trainers or hypnosis trainers, what they provide is not fit for purpose, or they don't know about the markets, and they blame it on the student. When somebody responds to that, as I have, saying I agree with that, and then explains why I agree with it, and provides evidence that in terms of the courses I offer, they come with a full money-back guarantee that no one else dares offer, because my track record over the past 3 decades over is one where I have more people filling 5-star theatres, 5-star cruise ships, appearing on television, doing major corporates, basically at the top of the industry, as well as people who don't have that ambition or weren't lucky enough, who are lower down but they're making an above average living from stage hypnosis, who I either originally taught or they didn't become as successful as they now are until they did mentoring and teaching with me. I provided the evidence of that, because otherwise that's just an assertion without evidence. And in the context of a thread where somebody says, you know, most stage hypnosis trainers aren't fit for purpose, I thought it might be a wise idea just to chuck in that link, htglive.com, because there's links on there to testimonials, albeit they're just a tiny percentage of the many thousands I have on file, but from people that you will recognise, people who are working on, you know, the likes of the Independence of the Seas and the Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, people who are filling, you know, venues with 800 to 3,500 seat theatres, locations all around the world, people who've got their own TV shows and such like. The fact is, when I state that I've taught more people who are currently successful, highly successful comedy stage hypnotists around the world than any other living, and that's the key word, any other living stage hypnosis trainer, it's true, and the evidence at htglive.com. Try and prove me wrong. You can't. You can try, but you'll waste your time, because remember I said I either originally taught them or they didn't become as successful as they are now until they did mentoring with me. When you put those two together, I most definitely have. I'm going to do another little video in reference to what other things niggle me about stage hypnosis, given that this thread was meant to promote discussion on that.